The chandeliers shimmered like captive stars above the royal ballroom, casting rivers of gold across marble floors so polished they reflected every swirl of silk and satin. Music drifted from the orchestra balcony in elegant waves, violins rising and falling like breath, cellos humming with restrained longing, while nobles laughed behind jeweled fans and gentlemen adjusted their cuffs with rehearsed confidence. In the very heart of this glittering spectacle, slightly apart yet impossible to ignore, stood the Duke. His dark suit was tailored with immaculate precision, silver embroidery tracing subtle patterns along the cuffs, and a slender cane rested in his gloved hand, not clutched in weakness, but held with composed authority. His pale, unfocused eyes did not chase the movement of the dancers, yet his face remained lifted, dignified, as though he could sense the architecture of the room through sound alone. He heard everything, the whisper of satin brushing marble, the faint hitch in a debutante's breath when she realized she stood too near him, the polite murmur of admiration that floated in his direction before dissolving into uneasy silence. He recognized pity instantly. It had a fragile, brittle tone, like porcelain tapped too lightly. Invitations had been sent across the kingdom announcing his attendance at this grand ball, and society had buzzed for weeks about the blind Duke. His wealth, his lineage, the tragic accident that had stolen his sight but never his title. In private drawing rooms, mothers praised his resilience and fathers spoke of strategic alliances. Yet now, when the waltz began and partners were claimed beneath the golden light, no one stepped toward him. Instead, the crowd parted almost invisibly around his still figure, leaving a courteous emptiness that felt heavier than rejection. A young lady approached within a few feet, encouraged by a determined mother at her back, but the moment she saw his unfocused gaze, uncertainty clouded her smile. She curtsied politely and retreated with an excuse about the heat. Laughter resumed elsewhere, louder than before, as if to compensate for the discomfort lingering in the air. The Duke inclined his head slightly, acknowledging a dance he had not been offered, and allowed the faintest curve of a smile to touch his lips. He would not beg for companionship. Dignity was the last thing darkness had not stolen from him. He listened instead to the rhythm of the room, mapping it carefully in his mind. The orchestra to his left, the buffet tables to the right, the clusters of gossip shifting like restless birds. With every passing moment, the music seemed to grow more distant, though it filled the entire hall. He had once been the finest dancer in court, praised for his precision and charm, his turns so seamless they drew applause before the final note. Now those same admirers hesitated, unsure how to move beside a man who could not see their smiles. Another waltz began, brighter and more daring, and couples spun into motion, their shadows sweeping across him like tides that refused to carry him along. He tightened his grip on the cane just slightly, not in anger but in quiet resolve. If no one asked him to dance, he would endure the evening as he endured everything else, with calm composure. Yet beneath that stillness was a pulse of longing, a memory of movement, of laughter shared mid-turn, of trust built between fingertips. He did not crave sympathy, he craved partnership. Around him, chandeliers glittered indifferently, and the polished floor reflected a world that would not quite reach him. And so he stood there, regal and solitary, while the kingdom waltzed on, unaware that the silence gathering around him was louder than any orchestra could ever be. The third waltz had just begun when the great doors at the far end of the ballroom opened with a sound softer than thunder yet powerful enough to ripple through every conversation. A young woman stepped inside, her gown flowing around her like liquid starlight, pale blue silk catching the chandelier glow so that she seemed almost illuminated from within. She did not rush, nor did she pause to measure the room's opinion. She simply walked forward with a calm certainty that contrasted sharply with the restless glitter of the crowd. Whispers followed her path, curious at first, then puzzled as they realized she was not scanning for the most eligible lord or the wealthiest heir. Her gaze settled instead on the solitary figure at the center of the marble floor, the Duke, standing as he had all evening, dignified and alone. The music swelled, and for a fleeting second it felt as though the entire ballroom held its breath. She approached him without hesitation, the soft rhythm of her steps steady and unafraid. until she stood close enough to hear the faint inhale he drew when he sensed her presence. "Your Grace," she said gently, her voice neither trembling nor overly bright, but warm and sincere. "May I have this dance?" The question hung in the air like a fragile ornament. Around them, fans stilled mid-wave, and conversations died unfinished. The Duke turned his face toward her voice, surprise flickering across his composed expression before giving way to something deeper, hope, cautious but unmistakable. "You may," he replied, offering his gloved hand with careful precision. When her fingers slipped into his, the contact was firm, deliberate, not guiding yet not hesitant either. She led him to the center of the floor, where the polished marble reflected their joined silhouettes like a promise made visible. The orchestra softened instinctively, as if aware they were scoring something sacred. At first their movements were measured, testing the invisible bridge between them. Her hand rested lightly against his shoulder, his settled at her waist, and she gave the slightest cue with her fingertips to signal the first turn. He listened not just to the music but to her breathing, to the subtle shift of fabric, to the confidence in her stance. With each step, uncertainty dissolved. He remembered the language of rhythm, the geometry of motion, the way trust could replace sight when offered freely. Soon they were gliding across the floor with effortless grace, his turns precise, his posture commanding, her laughter a bright ribbon weaving through the melody. Gasps of astonishment rippled outward as onlookers realized they were not witnessing charity but mastery. He spun her gently beneath his arm, perfectly timed with the crescendo, and the silk of her gown flared like a blooming flower before settling again. The silence that had once been heavy with pity transformed into reverence. No one dared interrupt the spell unfolding before them. The Duke's face, once guarded, now carried a quiet joy that radiated more brilliantly than any jewel in the room. He was not being led through steps. He was leading, responding, commanding the floor as though darkness had never touched him. When the final note lingered and faded, applause erupted in a thunderous wave that shook the chandeliers. Yet even amid the roar of admiration, he did not release her hand. "Thank you," he said softly, emotion threading through the words. She smiled, her thumb brushing reassuringly against his glove. "I did nothing extraordinary," she replied. "You simply needed someone who believed you could." And as the orchestra struck up a new melody and couples cautiously returned to the floor, the atmosphere had shifted forever. The crowd no longer saw a blind Duke standing alone. They saw a man capable of brilliance, waiting only for courage to meet him halfway.